Welcome once again to Unstoppable Mindset. Glad you're with us. Hope you can stay around for the whole hour. We have Rhett Burton today, who is our guest, and he is an author. He's a diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging person. And I'm really excited to hear about that. And I know he has some other stories to tell us. So we're going to get right into it. Rhett, welcome to Unstoppable Mindset.
Michael, good afternoon. Thank you for welcoming me. I'm excited to chat with you about diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, and so much more.
Yeah, and we'll have to definitely deal with the so much more, whatever it turns out to be, right?
Absolutely.
Well, let's start like I love to do, kind of more at the beginning, and tell us a little bit about you growing up and some of all the things that happened along the way there that probably helped kind of make you what you are today, or maybe not, for all I know.
Absolutely. Well, to start at the beginning, I don't think I can tell my story without mentioning to you and your audience that I was born with a rare birth defect known as craniosynostosis. Craniosynostosis is a birth defect that causes the skull not to fuse properly. And the incision, so I guess if I were to give it its full name, is I have sagittal craniosynostosis, which means that I have an incision running from the top of my head to about 3/4 of the way back. That shaped who I am because as I grew older and learned more about craniosynostosis, it impacted the empathy that I had for others. It impacted the way I look and feel about myself. And it made me more interested in craniosynostosis, folks that are inflicted with it, and those that weren't as fortunate as I was to have a successful surgery at GW Hospital in Washington, D.C.
So you had surgery to deal with that. When did that happen? What year was that?
Would have had surgery early on. So this is mid 1980s, somewhere between 1987 and 1988, when I was a very, very young child.
Is there still kind of visible evidence of the surgery and so on for you today?
There is. I must say, I'm a fairly tall guy. So for those that are taller than me and that could look down and see the top of my head, then yes, you can visibly see it.
So did it kind of affect you with other kids and so on growing up, or were they not too abusive and mean to you because you had something that looked a little different than most of them?
Well, in fairness, I would say most children are teased or picked on by their peers. I was no different. There was no exception to that rule for me. Growing up, I remember folks being really interested in when they heard the story and wanting to touch the incision or touch the scar, because I have what appears to be like a lump or a small indent. So once the teasing is over and you're just having conversation with folks, even from middle school and high school, they were very interested to touch and to feel, because I've always been very open about it. Had the surgery not been successful, I would have had Down syndrome. My life would have taken an entirely different path. So I've always been open in chatting about it.
Well, but you obviously survived growing up and you went to high school and to college. Did you do anything unusual in high school or college or anything like that? Were you in sports or any of those things, or were you just sort of what most kids were?
I would say I had a great high school and college experience. I tried out for sports teams in high school. Unfortunately, I didn't make the sports team, but I was friends with the athletes. It was a different time back then. So a lot of time was spent outside building relationships, biking, running, exploring. Video games were popular, but not to the height of their popularity as they are now. Video games weren't considered a sport. So there were no esports in my day. And then in college, I had a great collegiate experience also.
Yeah, video games have now become quite a big thing. most of them don't talk, so I don't get to do much in the way of video games, but I can appreciate the art form.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So you went to college. What'd you major in?
Yeah. So went to the University of Maryland Eastern Shore, a historically Black college and university on the Eastern Shore of Maryland, so near Ocean City, not too far from Delaware. And I studied sociology, got a minor in public policy, and UMES is has been, will always be one of the best decisions I've ever made.
Why is that?
The friendships that I've made, the relationships that were built, um, the social experience that I had at historically Black colleges and universities. Less like most schools, there are things like Student Government Association. So I got my first job working as an RA, a resident assistant in the residential communities. I was fortunate enough to be voted as the face of the sophomore class, the junior class, and even the face of the university. So it's called Mr. Sophomore and Mr. Junior and Mr. University of Maryland Eastern Shore. I went on to compete in the National Black College Hall of Fame contest, where I came in third.
Wow.
And oddly enough, my roommate at the time, at that experience, it happened in Missouri. He won, and he was from Tennessee State. So UMES has given me so much, and I will forever be indebted to that institution and the experience that it gave me.
So tell me about the competition. What did you have to do? How did you all compete?
Yeah, so it's an annual competition that takes place at a particular HBCU around the country, and all of the faces of the HBCU, so all of the misters, whatever the name of the university is, they go and compete. And it's something similar to a pageant where you have to showcase a talent. You do a monologue. There's a opening number. You are voted on by a panel of judges. And it is all to see who will be crowned Mr. Historically Black College and University for that year. So I was very fortunate. I competed in 2009. And again, didn't win, but did come in third place, and will, again, forever be grateful for that opportunity. I've met some lifelong friends from being a part of that contest.
That is really pretty cool. And obviously you did learn some speaking things along the way. You certainly seem to be pretty articulate in that regard as well. And you are a public speaker, aren't you?
I am very, oddly enough, going back to my time at UMES, that's when I really got interested in training and facilitation. Started off being a resident assistant. Oddly, I was the university's first freshman RA when I started in 2005. I was there for a semester and just networked and worked my way into getting the position, which had not been done before. You had to normally be a sophomore or a junior, so you could have some more collegiate experience, so you could give back to the freshman class. And I just became enamored with personal and professional development, designing, training, presentations, facilitating, public speaking. And then because I was fortunate enough to be the face of these classes, sophomore, junior class, and then the face of the university, I was an ambassador for the university, always speaking on behalf, whether it dealt with recruitment, retention, the social experience. And it was really a part of my journey that has shaped me to the man I am today.
When you speak, or when you were doing speeches and are doing speeches, do you like to write everything out and read, or do you tend to be more extemporaneous and modify according to the situation or whatever is happening?
I would say a little bit of both, contingent upon the audience. If I am giving a keynote, then I like to have my thoughts flushed out, especially if the audience is a C-suite or a group of professionals. When I'm working with colleges and universities, you can be a bit more free, a bit more fun. You can work in some audience engagement in a way that you just can't do when you're working with a group of professionals. So I would say a little bit of both based on the audience.
Well, how did you get into speaking? I would imagine it partly came from the UMES and the other experiences that you've talked about, but how did you get into doing that kind of as part of what you do?
Absolutely. Well, I was a member of the Student Government Association. I was a residential assistant, and there would often be opportunities to knowledge share, whether it was working with first year communities or, helping new staff learn processes and procedures. And I would always volunteer. I really felt comfortable being on stage. I've always felt comfortable being in front of people. I've never minded making a fool of myself if that's what was required, but also standing firm and speaking boldly about issues that are important to me, and trying to bring people along. So that's really where it started.
I find it interesting that so many people fear public speaking or fear being up on a stage. I guess they don't want to think that they might look dumb, or it's all about appearances and so on. But being up on stage has never, for example, bothered me. I've just never been bothered by doing that. I'm used to it. And I guess it's been that way my whole life.
That's awesome. And I know that you do it well, considering your history. So, yeah, I've always enjoyed it.
It is a lot of fun, especially when you really connect with an audience. How do you know when you've really connected with an audience?
I'm really big on energy. Mm-hmm. And you can probably appreciate this as a speaker. You can feel when the energy shifts. When you first get on stage, and again, contingent upon the audience, people are feeling you out. They want to know, are you a subject matter expert? Are you excited to be there? What's your level of enthusiasm to present to the audience? And for me, a lot of it was being able to open myself up, to be vulnerable, to share messages. And you can sense when the energy swings in your favor. And it's like nothing I've ever experienced before.
Yeah, when you really establish that connection, you know it, because you learn what the audience reacts to or doesn't react to. And when you get those reactions and you get what you expect to happen based on what you're saying and know you're connected, it just enhances what you do, and it makes it all the better, and it grows on both sides.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
It is so much fun to have that kind of really good connection with an audience. Well, so when you got out of, let me ask you this first. Craniosynostosis is something that you had. Is it something that affects you yet today, or is there any kind of issue with it, or is it just kind of, you have it, it's in your past, but it isn't something that you need to deal with on a daily basis or any kind of basis today?
That's a great question. I would say that it is forever a part of me. I am not in any physical pain because of the procedure, because of the incision or the scar that's been left. But it is interesting when I touch my head, when I get like a haircut, and you have to be very mindful. For me, if I'm telling a barber that you'll notice that my head is not necessarily round or flat, and just please be mindful of my incision. This is maybe a little odd, but sometimes I find myself knocking on the lump or bump that's on my head where the incision starts, just because it makes a hollow sound. So I'm very fortunate that I am not in any physical pain, but it's definitely there. I notice it, but I'm also very proud of it, because if the doctors were not successful, again, I don't know how my life would have turned out.
Well, have you ever said, whenever the discussion has come up, yeah, but you should see the other guy?
You know what? I'll have to incorporate that. I have not thought to do that. I'll have to incorporate that in there.
Yeah. You should see the other guy. But yeah. It is so easy to get so frustrated just because in one way or another, some of us look different, but it is so important to have a sense of humor and not let it get in the way. So I'm really excited that you're dealing with something that clearly is a little bit of a difference for you.
Absolutely.
But you deal with it, and it is just part of your life, and you move forward.
Absolutely. When I was younger, and in school, I was othered a bit because of it. But I must say, growing up during that time frame in the 80s, and just knowing that even though things may have been a little hurtful, I don't think the teasing was meant to be mean spirited.
Mm-hmm.
It was just the nature of the beast when you were in middle school or in high school, but you could always laugh about it afterwards. And if you were playing the dozens with someone, if you were laughing and joking, it didn't escalate. Sometimes someone had a funnier joke than you. And then it sort of died down from there. So I'm very, very fortunate because it helps you develop thick skin and to let you know that things really aren't that serious. Most things in life, um, you are in control of how you respond. Not necessarily what happened to you, and the way in which you respond dictates how people will treat you and interact with you afterwards. So I've been very, very fortunate to have enough self confidence and enough self love to know that sometimes jokes are funny. I don't mind being the butt of said joke because I never felt it was mean spirited with the intent to do real harm. It was just a part of the culture at that time.
You bring up a really good point. There are things that we don't have control over. And I talk a lot about, of course, the World Trade Center. And I've learned along the way that we didn't, of course, have control over the World Trade Center.
Totally.
And no matter what happens, we didn't have control over that. And we don't have control over how other people deal with what happened on September 11th. And we don't have control necessarily over what happened to us that day, but we have absolute control over how we choose to deal with it. It's all a matter of choice.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, you have such an incredible story. And knowing that you were part of something that involves a national tragedy and that you have sort of flipped the script or the story on its head, I think is a beautiful thing. And I'm sure it has served you extremely well as you've shared your story and even coached others that may not feel the same way you do.
Well, and in so many ways, things come up. Being blind, happening to be blind my entire life, I
Right.
didn't have control over that happening. But again, I have control over how I deal with it. I have control over how I choose to learn or not. And I hope that I do choose to learn and to progress and move forward and not let that be a negative factor in my life, just as you're talking about.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So what did you do after college?
So after college, after graduating from University of Maryland Eastern Shore, I was very fortunate that the university offered me my first professional role. I had been in paraprofessional roles or, odd jobs here and there through high school. It was a different time when you needed a worker's permit and you could only work a certain amount of hours. Um, I started off working for the university in the Division of Student Affairs, and I was working in residential communities. I was running a dorm. It was a great experience, and then I immediately started grad school in conflict analysis and dispute resolution at a neighboring institution, Salisbury University.
Ah, and so what all did you do there?
So one of the interesting things is we were a part of, I believe, the beta cohort. The institution had just got its accreditation to have the program, the conflict analysis and dispute resolution program, known as CATER. And we were part of that second cohort, and it was an amazing experience to be a part of that cohort model where there were about 30 of us that started, and I think 28 or 29 of us finished, to build community with folks, to share in an experience where we were so new, and to be a part of a program that was new to the university that has since made amazing strides. And at one point, I thought that before I became a DEI practitioner, I really had ambitions to be a sex and marriage therapist. That was odd. My sort of the genesis of that story is I used to watch the show Masters of Sex. I think it came on Showtime, and I was always intrigued with the history, with the science behind it, and I've always been fascinated by relationship and relationship dynamics. My life obviously took a different turn, but Salisbury University was a great academic experience, and it was one of the most important experiences of my life because I met my partner, my wife of umpteenth years. We met being a part of the same cohort at Salisbury University. So that place will always hold a special place in my heart for who it allowed me to meet.
So how long have y'all been married now?
You know what? If my mental math serves me correctly, about 8 years. We have been together for over a decade, but married for 8. So I would not have found my wife had I not been at Salisbury and had I not been part of that cater program.
Any children?
We do. We have one beautiful, amazing, talented, special little girl. She will be 2 later this year. And having the privilege to be a father, to be a girl dad, and to share that responsibility with my best friend is truly special and something that I don't take for granted.
Well, it sounds like you'll bring her up well. And of course, there'll be all sorts of challenges along the way.
I'm sure.
But again, those are things that one has to deal with, and you can. But again, it's interesting what came to mind when you said that you met your wife at the job. Again, It's all about choices, isn't it?
Absolutely. Best choice I ever made, going to Salisbury. Who would have thought that not only would I leave with a degree, but I would leave with my life partner? Amazing, amazing decision.
I love to think from time to time about what I've done in my life, what's happened in my life, and can trace everything back to choices.
Absolutely.
And it could have gone so many different ways at so many different times. Even after September 11th, the next day, my wife said, you ought to contact Guide Dogs for the Blind, where you've gotten your dogs, and let them know that you were in the World Trade Center and made it out because some people have visited you from there. And I never would have thought of that. But the result of that was that, that's just me, I wouldn't have necessarily thought of it, but she did. But the result was that they said, gee, can we put a little article out about you? And that just broke the whole dam of getting all sorts of visibility in the media, and all sorts of other things happened. But all the way in what we do and in my life, all the choices that I've made, I can trace what I've done back. Are there things I could have done differently? Sure. Are there things that maybe I should have done differently? Probably. But, you can't go back after the fact and just beat yourself up over things. I used to say I'm my worst critic. And I realized that's the wrong thing to say. I'm my best teacher because I'm the one that has to teach me. And when I look at choices and evaluate and make a choice, hopefully it's the right one, but either way, I made the choice, and I can't be ashamed of that.
Absolutely. It's amazing to hear you tell that story, not just for the revelation that you had, but to think the catalyst for you and the success that you had started off with a conversation from your wife and a suggestion. Absolutely beautiful. And I'm sure you are very grateful for that conversation or that suggestion.
Sure. Well, of course, it goes back further because we decided to move from California to New Jersey in the first place in 1996, and so many other choices along the way. And I think it's great to be able to think back of all the things that I've done and the choices that I made, because I then eventually get to the point of saying, now what do I do, and what can I learn, and what have I learned that I can use going forward? And I think that all too often we never take the time to be that introspective, and it's something that we all should do because it will help us and guide us with what we should do next.
Absolutely. I'm in full agreement.
So it's something that we really need to do more of. So anyway, from Salisbury, what did you do?
So from Salisbury, I got the master's degree, met my partner, and we decided that we were both working for separate universities. And my wife got bit by the tech bug very early on and had an opportunity to work at Facebook. And it required us to leave Maryland and to come out to California. Uh, this happened shortly after we got married and came back from our honeymoon. And we've been in California for the past 7 years, all because my wife decided to take a chance on herself. She believed in herself, and she invested in herself, which is why she got the role at Facebook. And for me, wanting to follow her lead, to support her, to champion the things that she was doing, and to say, you know what, it's time for a different experience. We are taking on a new level in life, and I'd love for us to do that in California.
So how's that going?
It's going extremely well. You know, the initial sticker shock of San Francisco was
Yes.
a lot coming from Maryland to the Bay. Everything from the cost of milk to gas was exponentially higher. That was a little shocking at first when, I had lived in the Maryland, DC, Virginia area my whole life, and things were expensive, but not that expensive.
Yeah.
And having worked at a couple of universities while I've been in California to where I am now, it's been such an amazing journey. And I'm so glad that we took that leap of faith to come this way, to come westward.
So what universities in California?
Yeah, I spent some time at Menlo College in Palo Alto.
Okay.
Also spent time at Academy of Art University. I've done a lot of DEI work with several different associations, sort of under the umbrella of this college, of the university system. And now I work at a nonprofit. So, I'm forever grateful. I was a higher ed practitioner for almost 15 years, loved my time there. There's something energizing about being around college students, about being in that environment. And now I work for a nonprofit, and I'm just so thrilled and excited with the opportunity I have every day to lead our DEIB initiatives. And to work collaboratively with our board and our CEO to ensure that we have an equitable workplace where we are diverse, we leverage our diversity so that we are inclusive, and that we create an environment where everyone belongs. So big job, but I'm definitely up for the challenge.
And what is your wife doing these days?
Well, my wife has one of the most important jobs, and that is caretaker.
There's that.
My wife helps to take care of our daughter. She also has a podcast, and she is an entrepreneur. So in supporting her entrepreneurial efforts, seeing her podcast thrive, and of course, the most important job of mothering and being of our child and being the best partner that she can be.
So she has left Facebook.
She has. She is no longer at Facebook or Meta. That journey has ended. Yeah, but it was a great opportunity and experience.
So what is her podcast about?
Yeah, so my wife's podcast is entitled Cultivating Her Space. She is the co-host and co-founder of the podcast with a clinician. Her name is Dr. Dom, and the podcast is all about uplifting women of color, to share experiences, to lift up voices and to tell stories that are not widely known or have never been told, and to provide community for women of color. So very proud of her in those efforts.
That's pretty exciting.
Absolutely.
So I probably wouldn't be a good volunteer to be on it, but I'm very excited about it. It's great that she's doing that and that she and the doctor are making a very successful podcast. That's cool.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
And can hardly wait to hear about your daughter going on the podcast. That should happen soon.
Yeah, very early on, She was a guest. She was an internal guest when my wife was recording during the pregnancy, and then there were a few episodes where she had to record, and you can hear my daughter in the background making sure that she got her 5 minutes of fame and stardom. So yeah, I can't wait for her to be her own independent guest.
You have to have opinions, you know.
That's true. Very, very true.
So what's the nonprofit that you're working at? Tell me about that, if you would.
Yeah, so the name of the nonprofit is Compass Family Services. It's been in existence over 100 years in San Francisco, and the goal of the nonprofit is to end family homelessness and to help families achieve self-sufficiency. I've been there for about 7 months. It's been a really great experience. I've really enjoyed having the opportunity to work at the nonprofit. There are amazing people there doing trauma-informed work every day and giving back to the community, trying to help the unhoused population in San Francisco, which is all in the thousands, about 8,000 folks, and doing what we can along with so many other amazing organizations, trying to help in the homelessness crisis in our city.
So what do you do? How does all that work?
Yeah, well, I, as the director of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging at the job, I always like to center the folks that I work with. I may have a fancy title, I may be considered a senior leader, but the organization is nothing, and I am nothing without the people that are on the ground doing the hard work. We have case workers, we have case managers, therapists, child care professionals. They are truly the heroes at Compass, working with folks that have experienced trauma, that are experiencing homelessness, that have mental health challenges, that have substance abuse challenges, and the work they do every single day to help find housing, to help get folks set up with jobs, to take care of children is truly remarkable. And again, though I lead our DEIB efforts, for me, I am nothing without them, because they are the heart of the organization.
So in the things that you do, I kind of imagine the answer to this, but is there a faith component?
Well, I would say faith, sure. Yes. I mean, there is the faith that the organization has put in me to lead our efforts to be the tip of the spear or the head of the ship, but everything needs to be collaborative. I'd like to bring ideas to the table and to co-design them with the folks that I work with, whether they're in the C-suite or their frontline personnel, because I see myself as one cog in the wheel of Compass that makes the organization go.
Well, and it should be a team effort by any definition. The fact is that anytime someone thinks they're it's so unfortunate that yeah, you know what I'm saying.
Absolutely.
That's just not the way to do it. And so it should be collaborative. And it's great to really discover the whole concept of teamwork, isn't it?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'd like to consider myself a culture ad. Folks have been very kind. Again, I am in my organizational infancy, but I'd like to think that we are having an impact. And again, I never want to miss an opportunity to uplift the folks that have preceded me, the folks that have had a longer longevity than I have, and that are doing the work of serving our clients every day.
So dealing with DEIB, especially the whole idea of diversity and inclusion and so on, I would probably be a little remiss not to at least ask the conceptual question about a lot of us who happen to have a disability, whether it be physical or not, tend to feel that diversity has left disabilities completely out of the scheme of things. If you ask the average person, what does diversity mean, or what's a diverse environment, they'll talk about race, they'll talk about gender, sexual orientation, so on. And even the experts don't tend to talk about disabilities as part of that. How do you deal with that? Or how do we, and as a more general question, how do we change that conversation so that the 25% of all people who are left out because they have a disability get included in the conversation and truly have seats at the table.
Well, I think you're absolutely right. So let me uplift what you said. And as a practitioner and speaking on behalf of the community of practitioners, you're right. We all have to do a better job in centering disability, accessibility, and ensuring that we are inclusive in all of our efforts. I think that far too often, when you are dealing with folks that have physical visible disabilities, it is a little easier to ensure that they're included, and it is drawn to your attention more. But a lot of that deals with the fact that we are not centering our practice around ensuring that all communities that have been marginalized, all communities that have no voice or a small voice at the table are centered. So I think it begins with educating ourselves a bit more on the disability community, the disabled community, making sure we understand the compliance component of accessibility, working with our HR teams or people and culture teams, and ensuring that we are hearing from those with lived experiences and that are the subject matter experts in this area, centering their voices, asking what their needs are, and how we can acquiesce to build an inclusive environment where they are helping us center and focus on policies and practices and procedures that make them feel included or make them feel like they belong. So I am with you 100%. As someone and it's interesting when you think about disability, because this is something that even if you are an able-bodied person now, you never know what could lead or what could happen that may lead you to having a disability. And as someone that was on the precipice of having Down syndrome, that at any point in time, there's still being research done on craniosynostosis. I like to be mindful of that, and not just the way I interact in my practice at the nonprofit, but also in the concerted effort I do or have in my learning. For those listeners of yours that are familiar with San Francisco, or I know you're familiar, I am taking classes at City College of San Francisco, and I recently completed a disability course that was taught by two amazing women, one of which that had a physical disability she was just so humane in her teaching and helping us understand to become not just better practitioners, but better humans. So I think it begins with education. That's the educator in me, and ensuring that we are centering voices of said community.
You said something that's really interesting. Unfortunately, it all too often goes the other way. When you said that it's a lot easier when it's a physical disability, and usually that's true because you can see it to include. The problem is that's not usually what happens, because the fear immediately comes out. Oh my gosh, as you pointed out, that could happen to me. Mm-hmm. And so we ignore it, and we tend to leave out disabilities because we don't recognize that disability doesn't mean a lack of ability.
Absolutely.
And I don't know that I don't have a better term than disability, but if we can change the definition of diversity like we have, then we also ought to be able to change the definition of disability. It's a characteristic. And as I love to point out to people, and I've said it many times on this podcast, the reality is we all have disabilities. Your disability leaving out craniosynostosis, or the things that other people with eyesight have, your biggest disability is that you can see. And the reason that's a disability is because as soon as there's a power failure, if you don't have your phone or a flashlight or a candle around, you don't know what to do in the dark. And light dependency is not a problem for me. Yeah. We all have disabilities, except that technology has covered it up. Yeah. We haven't grown to recognize that in reality, it shouldn't matter, because disability is not a lack of ability. Disability is a characteristic. And we all ought to figure out ways to start to deal with that and recognize that there's nothing wrong with doing something using alternatives to what other people use.
Absolutely. And you hit the nail on the head. We all have varying levels of ability. And I think that's where you get this big movement now with folks being more cognizant of neurodivergence and making sure that they are delineating folks that may be neurotypical or neurodivergent. And again, just centering on the fact that just because we do things differently, just because our abilities vary, does not mean that there is not value that can be added, does not mean that folks should be treated differently, but that each of us are capable of making meaningful contributions to any workforce, to any relationship, and to society at large. So I am in 100% agreement with you.
We really need to learn to understand what equality means. And that's part of the issue, that equality doesn't mean that just because you provide everybody the exact same thing, that it's equal. Because providing me with a computer monitor or a pen and paper or a calculator that doesn't talk isn't equal. And at the same time, it should be appropriate to say, if you don't know, what do we need to do to give you access to the computer system? Or what do we need to do to give you a calculator? Or a lot of companies have coffee machines. They have these fancy machines where you go up and you touch the screen and you can get anything from espresso to hot tea or hot chocolate, but they're totally inaccessible to some of us.
Yeah.
And the problem in part is that not enough technology is being made that makes sure that there are buttons to do those things as well. So it gets to be a real challenge, but we tend to not be inclusive in ways that we should. And I recognize that it's not about people hating, in this case at least, hating people, but there is a lot of fear, and it's a lack of education, as you said, but we do need to change that conversation.
I agree. We need both equity and equality. You need both to make sure that everyone has equal opportunities and the chance that they deserve to succeed. So I am in 100% agreement with you. And I think it's important that we, just like we demystify other terms, that disability is not a dirty word. It is not a bad thing. It's something that we have to unlearn some of the harmful stances and practices that we have been taught, whether it's been through our family or the media, and be more accepting, more tolerant, more loving, but most importantly, more informed about what we can do to make the world a better place where all of us have access and opportunities to make the kind of difference that I know that we can make.
Sure. It's a characteristic. Purely
Absolutely.
and totally and only it's a characteristic.
Absolutely.
And the reality is, although it's hard to get people to accept it, it's a characteristic that we all have in one way or another.
Agreed.
So, it is one of those things that one has to deal with, but we'll get there. And I expect your daughter to lead the way.
I appreciate that. I will do my best.
Yeah. Tell her it's her job.
Yes.
So you are also an author.
Yeah.
I'd love to learn more about that.
Absolutely. So early on in my career, I had an opportunity to go to Lithonia, Georgia, to the Allen Entrepreneurial Institute, which is owned by Lester Bill Allen, an extremely wealthy and successful Black man in Georgia. And being at that entrepreneurial institute was really insightful and life-changing for me, because far too often what we are taught about money or wealth is that you need to accumulate it, and it's, things are better when you have more money, but not as much about the impact you can have, not just on your life or that of your family, but of your community. And the Entrepreneurial Institute in Georgia, it was his way of giving back to the community, to show folks what you can do and how you can weaponize money and wealth for good. And being at that institute, having had the opportunity to sit through several different leadership seminars and meeting community leaders in that area, it got me inspired, because one gentleman spoke about telling your story and the power of storytelling and using books to do that. And talking through whether you are self-published or you are published through one of the major publishing distribution systems like Penguin or Scholastic or Simon & Schuster, that you have a story to tell and you should do so. So early on, I believe I was 22 or 23. I wrote my first book entitled Brother Please, a life book to life and relationships. And that was my introduction into finding my voice and telling my story. That led to me co-authoring a book with the co-author that I've had for the other 5 books, entitled Mistakes. My life, my pencils don't come with erasers, just life lessons. So I was in the professional development world, the self-help space. Then when my co-author had his son or my nephew, we got into writing children's picture books. So written 5 children's picture books. One is a trilogy series called When I Grow Up. So it's called the Super Series. When I grow up, I want to be super healthy, super smart, super rich. That led to the last 2 children's books I've written, one called My Melanated Munchkin, and lastly, Dentist Debbie. So I've been very fortunate to tell some stories in the self-help sphere and to do some children's picture books.
So what is Dentist Debbie all about?
So Dentist
Needless
Debbie
to say,
is about a little Black girl named Debbie who is infatuated with dentistry. I think it's amazing that we have so many creative stories. There are witches and dragons and princesses and monsters and so many amazing different works. But I wanted to center something that dealt with occupations, things that you can be proud of, things that our society and people need. And hence was the birth of Dentist Debbie.
That's cool.
Yeah, thank you.
And so when she grows up, she'll probably want to be a dentist.
You have it right.
So will there be sequels?
Well, you know what? I am thinking about writing another one. I must say, I have a few ideas swirling through my brain. I want to write something. I want to tell a specific story about my daughter, my wife, and I, and I'm still flushing that out. But yes, there is some more coming. I just haven't got that far yet. Still flushing the story out.
Well, you got to continue Debbie.
Yeah. Well, if not Debbie, I'm not sure if I'm going to do a sequel to Dentist Debbie or My Melanated Munchkin, but I am definitely not done writing children's picture books.
Tell me about the Melanated Munchkin.
So, oddly enough, I was on the BART headed to Oakland, and I don't really remember what for. And this was a late night, and the BART wasn't packed with people, which is a rarity. And I saw a mother and daughter sitting on the train in the same car as me. We were spread apart, but I just saw the mother pouring in to her daughter. They were reading, they were laughing, they were having a good time. And this was before I had children. And My Melanated Munchkin just popped in my head. So I literally wrote 80 to 90% of the book in my phone on the train ride because I was inspired by what I saw.
So what's the book about?
So My Melanated Munchkin is all about a little girl named Kyra, and it is telling the history of why she should be proud of her skin, of her complexion, of who she sees in the mirror, and it relates back to leaders and women that have had great success and a great impact in history. And it is told from the viewpoint of me being a parent, because this is my melanated munchkin. And I am telling her a story that is articulated through her eyes, but is in my voice.
Sounds really a lot of fun.
Thank you. I really appreciate that.
Well, I think we're going to have to hunt them down. I'll have to get somebody to read them out loud and describe the pictures, but we'll get there.
Absolutely.
Well, like other authors, of course, I have to ask this kind of a question. Do you have any kind of a favorite character or story or anything that helps shape you in the author world and just your life in general?
Wow. Well, I would say yes. I would say early on, before I had a child, my inspiration was my nephew. This was the first little person that I had a chance to interact with on a regular basis because he was my co-author son. And now, because I have my daughter, she is my source of inspiration. She is my why. And I can't wait to tell more stories that involve her.
Do you have a favorite author?
Wow, that's a great question. Do I have a favorite author? You know what? If I had to pick an author that was my favorite, I would probably say it's Dale Carnegie. Because prior to getting into the children pictures book space, I was doing personal and professional development books. How to Win Friends and Influence People really did change my life. It changed my outlook. And I am a student of Dale Carnegie. So I would say it has to be Dale Carnegie.
I am also a student of Dale Carnegie, and I think that although a lot of people say, but it's old, the language is all stilted and so on, the concepts aren't, folks.
Yeah.
The concepts are absolutely as relevant today as they ever were. And I don't care that the language is a little bit different than what we're used to. That's not the part to pay attention to.
Agreed. I agree with you. If for your listeners, if you've never read How to Win Friends and Influence People, pick it up. It's an amazing read. And it is truly transformational if you take heed to the lessons that he imparts.
The very fact that a guy can advertise to the world, come to a meeting and we will show you how to, as you put it, win friends and influence people. And he fills up a major New York hotel ballroom just on the basis of that in 1937. And of course, it went from there.
Yeah.
And his lessons are absolutely as relevant today as they ever were. And I wish more people would recognize the value of reaching out and being open to friendship. I've had a lot of conversations with people about dogs, for example, and people talk about how dogs love unconditionally. And I absolutely think that's true, but dogs don't trust unconditionally. Dogs, however, unlike humans, are more open to trust unless there is something that comes along that absolutely causes a dog not to have a trusting environment, like they're extremely abused or whatever. They will be open to developing a trusting relationship because it's what they want. And even the most distrustful dogs can learn to trust again. We're not as open to trust, and we could take lessons from dogs to do that. And certainly it's the same concepts as to what Dale Carnegie talks about.
Absolutely. I am, even though I have puppies, for your listeners, my Zoom background is full of puppies because I like puppies. I like dogs who kind of hard not to like them. I haven't necessarily had a lot of dogs in my life. So, Michael, I have to ask, do you have a favorite breed of dog? Is there a dog that you feel connected with?
Well, I have had 8 guide dogs. The first 3 were golden retrievers. The next 4 were yellow labs. And now the guide dog I have today, Alamo, is a black lab. It's the first black lab.
Nice.
I like larger dogs, but I really think that all dogs are open to develop relationships. So I'm not too prejudiced. I like a lot of different breeds of dogs.
I appreciate that.
But I love labs and I love Goldens especially, of course.
Absolutely. I have a colleague or a former colleague that has a golden retriever and they just love golden retrievers. That is the bee's knees to them. Yeah. Golden retrievers.
And we have a cat. Well, I have a cat. It's only I now. My wife passed away in November, so I keep saying we. So she's still here somewhere. But we have a cat, and I'm not sure that, well, maybe Stitch is as trusting as a dog. It's a different kind of a personality, though.
Well, I want to share my condolences. I know we talked about this off camera about your wife passing, and you don't want to leave your cat out. You don't want them to feel left out.
She loves to be carried around. So whenever I carry her, I say, all right, it's time to activate toe to tabby service. And we have a lot of fun with it. She really loves to get carried around and doesn't seem to complain about that very much. Thank you very much.
Oh,
So do you have a favorite quote or a mantra that you live by or think about?
Well, I would say a favorite is tough, but I am a New Year's resolution-esque type of person. Not sure if you are. And for the listening audience, even if you're not, I know some people think they may be a bit cliche. I'd like to create yearly mission statements or yearly mantras. And I am guided by this mantra in one question. So I'd love to share that with you in the audience. The question that tends to guide my 2023 is as of 12/31/2023, I want to have accomplished what? And the mantra that goes along with that is I am going to be focused on solutions, not problems.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what it is for me, especially for 2023. I am going to be singularly focused on solutions and not problems. And I want to hold myself to the standard when I am manifesting what I want for my life, what I want for my family, and in all areas of wellness. As of December 31st, 2023, what do I want to have accomplished?
What was your 2022 New Year's resolution?
Well, my 2022 New Year's resolution was pretty simple. It was to sit back, relax, and enjoy. 2021 was a little tumultuous for my family, dealing with some personal issues and some family issues. And I felt that I was always on edge and that I was not taking time to sit back because I felt I had to be in constant motion, to relax because I found it very difficult to relax, almost as if it pained me to do so because maybe my energy should be put somewhere else, and to enjoy and enjoy the smaller things in life and to practice self-care and to invest in things that brought me joy.
And that's cool. You've obviously each year given a lot of thought to what you want for your mission statement and your goal for the next year.
Absolutely.
And the difference between what you're saying and what a lot of New Year's resolutions tend to be all about is that you are providing yourself a general goal. You're not providing you something that you can't keep and that you can't make happen.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And the other part about that is you also understand about making choices. So when you adopt that, it's great because then you can look every day even and say, well, am I working toward my goal or my mission this year?
You have it 100% correct. That's the way I feel. And that's sort of why it's structured in that way.
Yeah. If you were to be able to go back and talk to your 18-year-old self or somewhere around that age, what would you teach them that maybe you didn't know then that you have learned?
That's a
I'm
great
sure
question.
there are a lot of answers to that, but
I know that's a great question. I would say if I could impart any wisdom to my 18-year-old self, I would say take chances, take risk.
Mm-hmm.
That high risk, high reward, and that ultimately I want to make sure that as you are going through these formative years, that you are not just experiencing what life has to offer, but you're living it. You are living and breathing the kind of lifestyle that you want to manifest. So take risks, go places that you wouldn't normally go, experience things that you are not sure if you're interested in, read books that you wouldn't normally pick up, develop friendships and relationships with folks that are not necessarily in your friend group, to take chances, to be bold, to take risk.
You think you weren't as much of a risk taker when you were 18? Because you certainly over the years have stepped out a lot of times.
Definitely was not this way at 18. A bit more conservative and growing up in a single parent household, wanting to do everything I could to be the best son to my mom and to make her proud. So in doing that, you find yourself being a bit more conservative and walking the straight and narrow more than you would if you're in a two parent household, if the financial circumstance of your home is set and wonderful, if you're not dealing with, food insecurity or being unhoused. So yeah, I was very fortunate to have an amazing upbringing with a truly godsend of a mother. But I would tell myself to go back and take more risk. And these risks don't have to be, as lavish as, hey, you should jump out of an airplane. But it could be, hey, you should expand your friend circle, read
Right.
different books. So things like that.
Do you think your mom would approve?
Very much so.
Yeah. It's not a bad thing to be willing to be adventurous and to step out. And you're right. It isn't all about jumping out of an airplane. That's not the risk-taking thing. But it is important to not limit yourself just because you're afraid of doing something, even though you know it's something that you're capable of doing. But I don't want to do that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what do you think is the most important lesson you've learned in life? Because you wax philosophical, so I figure that's something worth asking.
Well, the most important lesson that I think I've learned is probably to love myself and to love myself completely. To understand that I am an ever-evolving being, that what is important to me, who is important to me, is going to change, and that I need to trust my instincts and trust myself. So to love myself in a way that makes me lovable from others, but to provide myself everything that I want to give to someone else. So I would say to love myself. And to love myself radically and boldly would be that very thing.
And that's not being a conceited kind of thing. We should learn to love who we are and what we are. And if we don't like what we do, then we choose to make a difference and fix that. But if we like and believe that we're making good choices, then we should love that too.
Absolutely. I agree.
We really need to have better respect for ourselves and kind of go on from there. Well, Rhett, this has been really wonderful, and I'm glad that we got to spend all of this time. But I would like to end by asking you if people want to reach out and maybe contact you, learn more about you, learn about Compass and so on. How do they do that?
Yeah, well, for your listeners, if you want to stay connected to me, you can go to LinkedIn. If you have a LinkedIn profile, and just type in my name, Rhett Burden.
Can you spell that, please?
Absolutely. That's Rhett. And then my last name is Burden, Burd as in David, En. Please connect with me on LinkedIn. I would love to learn more about you. I'd love to learn more about your story and find ways for us to collaborate. You can also visit Rhett Burden. That's my first and last name, Rhettburden, rhettburden.com if you're interested in purchasing your copy of my children's book.
That was going to be my next question, because I think that people will want to learn more about that. And I'm going to start a campaign to advocate for finding out what happens to Debbie, but that's another story. Well, Rhett, we really appreciate you being here, and I appreciate you listening to us today. I hope that you enjoyed it and that you will give us a 5-star review, especially if you go to iTunes or whatever, but we'd love a 5-star rating. So please do that. If you'd like to suggest podcast guests, and Rhett, you as well, please feel free. You can reach me at Michael H.I., Michaelhi at Accessibe, ACCESSIBE.com. You can also find the podcasts at michaelhingson.com/podcast, and Hingson is HINGSON, so michaelhingson.com/podcast. And as we've talked about, and I talk a lot about on podcasts, I am a keynote speaker and do a lot of traveling to speak. So if anybody knows of any speaking opportunities, reach out. Love to hear from you. But Rhett, one more time, thank you very much for being here. And we'd love to have you come back on again in the future.
Absolutely. It'd be my honor. Thank you, Michael.